Today we'll be talking about gangs, guns, and drugs by Will, Ryan, and Jacob.
So on our agenda, we will be talking about the Surrey protest about youth gangs that resulted in death in BC, issues with the youth and utilization of drugs, risk factors in social settings, risk factors that can occur within a school, the summary of youth in gangs within Canada, youth and guns will also be discussed, group recommendations, and peer-reviewed recommendations.
Our topic information: increase in public perception towards youth and gangs, guns, and drugs, including increased public outcry, such as news article that will be mentioned, use beginning, brought into guns, gangs, and drugs, since their recreational drugs are being are beginning to have opioids laced with them. Opioid crisis, which could lead more youth into using, increased opioid use, which lead dealers to utilize use as carriers in order to avoid detection and allow use to make some cash. Gangs are very prevalent among youth, especially because of how accepting they are, easily targeted, vulnerable youth who become neglected. Gangs are supplying youth with guns, therefore increasing threats towards the public and the police, which, with gangs providing guns, forces youth to affiliate with the gang in order to pay off debts.
Okay, so our news article that was that I gathered through research was it occurred in Surrey, BC. It was a protest that occurred in high schools, or in a high school in Surrey, BC, which left 2 students dead who were involved in gangs, and there was a public outcry not only in that community but around Canada, and especially in that high school, because they did in fact protest about how it's a growing increase that youth and gangs are occurring, and especially with the RCMP, they need to step in and handle that situation in order to prevent and deter future youth from committing crimes and becoming part of drugs, gangs, and guns. Yeah.
So with youth and drugs, some of the risk factors that can be in a social setting are kids can try drugs just to try and fit in with that group of people. It can lead them down the wrong path later on. It can cause problems with family. They can get distant from all their friends. So when youth does drugs at a young age, they're more prone just to do it because they feel like cool, I guess, and they can become distant from their friends and family because 1, they can start stealing from them, 2, they just start disrespecting everyone, and they just don't really care about anything else except being cool in their group and doing their drugs. They have more altercations with people, so let's say for instance a drug deal goes wrong, they can end up fighting more, or there's just more altercations because of their addiction. That's all they're thinking about. And obviously they can get addicted and spend all their money. And then some risk factors that can happen in schools, they can again be peer pressured into doing drugs to try and fit in with that group of people, or if their friends are doing it, that's what they want to do. It can lead to a poor education because they don't attend class and they just don't care. Poor connections with teachers and students. They again have altercations with their teachers because they just don't really care, they don't want to be there, they're just totally disengaged with school itself. A big one is that it can cause damage to the frontal lobe, because as a young person, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed yet, and this can cause permanent damage, and that can cognitive your decision-making skills. also lower attention span and more prone to getting in trouble. So, yeah, when teens are exposed to drugs at a young age, like I said before, it not only affects their social life but also their school life, and also stunts their brain development and can cause permanent damage that they can never fix. And then down the path of life, it can lead them to gangs and drugs and just a bad path of life that no one really wants to see their kids go down. So, yeah, it's youth and drugs.
So youth and gangs, so some risk factors in a social setting. Friends who use drugs or gang members are more likely to associate their friends into the gang as well. Street socialization, so if you live in like a poor neighborhood where gangs are more prevalent, you're more or less likely to have friends in a gang, so you're easier to become associated with gangs in general. Having gang members in your class makes it easy for teens to get interested in joining gangs. Preteen exposure to stress, so just the slightest stressors can cause a teen to pursue a path in gangs because of the socialization it comes and brings just different exposure to gangs that way. Interaction with delinquent peers, so teens that have friends that are constantly in trouble with the law make it easier and kind of more fun for other teens to try it, to go that way. Risk factors in schools, so poor school performance, so teens that are not very educated and just kind of skip school are more or less gonna join a gang because it's a lot easier that way. Negative labeling by teachers, so teachers labeling students that are the bad egg or bad apple tend to push students into joining different affiliations by that way. High levels of antisocial behavior, so people that just don't want to talk to teachers, don't want to talk to any adults, kind of find comfort in lowering themselves into like a gang setting. They have learning difficulties and educational frustrations. So there are many risk factors when it comes to youth and gangs. Above are a few examples of a lot of different risk factors that can happen. By having general knowledge in risk factors that our youth are experiencing, we are able to step in and provide help at a more efficient way. By doing this, we are able to intervene at a much earlier stage, which will help reintegrate these youth into our society and make it easier for them to stay away from gangs.
So I decided to speak about youth and guns. So youth and guns stem from many common factors across Canada, which include low socioeconomic status and traumatizing events during childhood. From this one study that I found in Toronto, where they interviewed 10 kids, or 10 youths rather, they all had firearms for self-preservation rather than just to say that they have it. It was more or less for themselves to be safe. One underlying issue is that when youths obtain guns, gangs utilize this to their advantage in order to recruit. So therefore, they've already got the means to a gun. That way, and that means that the means for drugs is much easier. And when you're a youth and you're struggling socioeconomically, it's much easier to say yes to these gangs because they're offering you money that you wouldn't normally be able to attain by working your regular job after school. It's more, hey, if you transport these drugs, this amount of drugs, don't tell anybody, we'll give you, let's say, $600 to do this. And you're basically turning yourself into a drug mule at that point in time in order to make some extra cash on the side in a short period of time. It's these youths are taking this into consideration because instead of working, let's say 60, 70 hours to make that $600, they're working for half an hour to an hour. And you do that a couple times a night, these youths are bringing in thousands of dollars within one work week. So, like I said, the gangs simply manipulate the youth in order for them to believe that they have the gun for protection. But in reality, if they were just to stay away from gangs, there's no necessarily real reason to have a gun. And the fear of being shot at and having no protection was also seen as a common issue with these youth. They felt that if they didn't have a weapon to protect themselves, that they felt vulnerable, and they get that a lot from the media, especially down in the U.S., where many of them have open carry laws, where you can just bring around pistols, long guns, wherever you want, and they say that it's for protection. But up here in Canada, that's illegal, and I found that with youth having these guns, it's not necessary because they have to, it's not necessary since they're only using it for gang matters. If you don't have a gun, you're not perceived to be a threat, and if you don't get involved with gangs, you don't need a gun in the first place. So then we had some recommendations that we came to a conclusion together. One of them was inform youth within high school that there are other better quality of life decisions rather than relying on guns, gangs, and drugs. Sure, it might seem like an easier route to make money in the short-term process, but if you really think about it, you're putting your life on the line for an extra $300-400, and when I say putting your life on the line, you're seriously putting your life on the line to the point where people are being killed, especially youths, because they're seen as vulnerable, and gangs utilize this because they don't care about these youths. They just want, their drugs to be transported and pay them cheaper than it would for someone else. That's why they find it easier to utilize youth rather than regular aged people. So increased police presence as it pertains to youth committing crimes for organized crime gangs. Speak with organized crime groups that there will be an increase of officers that will be constantly after them, trying to arrest them for anything if they keep utilizing youth. So basically what we're trying to get across is if we increase that police presence where those gangs are located, we'll be able to deter that crime from occurring, and gangs will soon come to the realization that police mean business, and we don't want our youth to become involved with that, because if we can stop it when they're at a youth, they're not going to pursue it when they're older. It's much easier to do that in the sense when they're younger and get that, trained into their head that, there's much better things that we could be doing with your life rather than falling back onto gangs, guns, and drugs. So that's what we're trying to recommend there. Refer teens to Kids Help Phone on how to deal with these situations. Obviously, police officers are generalists, and we can't always do the utmost in specific categories. Therefore, there's people out there that know how to properly deal with these situations and know how to get the proper action plan and help in order to help these youths become successful in life rather than just relying on transporting drugs or being affiliated with gangs. That's when we stated create an action plan for counselors or other youth helpers like the Kids Help Phone in order to help implement it for potential troubled youth in order to deter these situations from occurring. Like we said, we want to make sure that these situations aren't going to occur in the first place, hence why we heavily rely on community-based policing and get the word out there that there's so many more ways we can deal with these situations rather than letting it happen first and just reacting to that. We want to stop it at the root cause before it actually occurs. And so educate teens by showing them that carrying these items such as guns and drugs and being a part of gangs are actually threatening their lives, not the lack of guns. You don't need a gun to protect yourself if you're not committing any crimes. It's more or less teens trick themselves, and gangs really help with this, that, I need a gun to protect myself. But it's really not. You need to, if you don't affiliate yourself with these gangs, if you push yourself away from that and basically, for lack of a better term, mind your own business, your life isn't going to be threatened. They'll ask you, they'll say no, say you want no part of it, and most of the time the gangs will just leave you alone because they know that you're not going to come back to them saying, oh hey, can I carry drugs for you? No, you're more interested in having a better quality of life rather than trying to work for these gangs, knowing that you'll either end up dead or be part of a gang for the rest of your life and have no actual life outside of that gang, or you'll end up in a prison for the rest of your life.
All right, so this is our peer-reviewed article that we found addressing the phenomenon of gangs in youth. So following the lead of the model's designer, they endorse 5 fundamental objectives that have been proven effective in contributing to the development of a positive social environment for youth. So they include encourage links with adults by identifying individuals as a role model, offer youth real and constant so offer youth the real opportunities to integrate into the community by giving them responsibilities and having confidence in them.
And they also state to train youth to develop the necessary skills so that their interrogation is a success, and also to recognize their efforts to interrogate and just have that reinforcement. And lastly, to develop clear values and role models so that youth are truly tempted to adopt them, so they actually realize and understand what and why it's wrong and how they can improve.
Alright, so what we found interesting about this article is it's based in Montreal with 3 different organizations that have come together to kind of make these fundamental objectives to kind of bring the youth together in the community to help reintegrate and make different, like just to make the different model to help reintegrate our youth.
Yeah, I think that big thing is like there are some similarities between our recommendations that we made and what this article has stated. I think the big issue is trying to get that youth someone who can act in that parenthood role for them and hopefully guide them to the better quality of life decisions. When they have that lack of parenting, they usually rely on gangs to deal with that situation rather than trying to seek help, because it's an easy route for them to get out. It's an easy route for them to rely on and deal with that situation.
And to kind of add on to that a little bit, sorry, I think these youth really need like a strong role model, because if they have a strong role model that they can look up to, maybe instead of trying to be peer pressured to get into drugs, which can lead them into gangs, which will get them introduced to guns, if they have this strong role model that they can actually look up to, instead of being peer pressured, they can be like, oh, instead of being like my friends, I want to be like this person. So having that influence in your life can alter which path you want to go down.
And that's just about it for our presentation. If you have any questions pertaining to our presentation, just shoot us an email. We're more than happy to answer any questions that you have for us, and thank you for being our instructor.